Let's take a look at the activity life cycle in an Android activity. This is a very important concept to understand in building your Android application because you're going to have to deal with activities and understand how the operating system is going to affect the way that your activity code is going to be triggered when building your application. Basically, what we're going to look at here is what the normal flow is of an Android application. So if a user starts your application and starts your activity, it's first going to hit an onCreate method, then an onStart method, then onResume, then the activity will go into a running state. So this is typically where the user will see the activity. It's in the foreground and they're interacting with the activity. Now, if the user leaves the activity, then we're going to go into an on pause state. And then when the activity is actually no longer visible, so it's completely left the screen, the difference here would be if you're in an activity and then a user clicks on a button that launches another activity, it might just go into on pause. But if a user hits home or something like that and actually completely exits the activity and the activity is no longer visible at all and it's no longer on the stack, then it's going to go to the on stop. And then on destroy is not always going to get called, but when the operating system needs that memory back that the application is occupying, it could call on destroy and actually destroy the activity, at which time the activity is completely shut down. Looking back through this, there's some parts here where your activity may actually exhibit somewhat different behavior. For example, if we went through the onCreate, onStart, onResume, we have our activity running and the activity becomes paused. For example, someone clicks a button and launches another activity on top of your activity, but then they hit the back button and they go back to your activity. OnResume is going to be called and your activity is going to be running again. So that's another one of those flows that we have to keep in mind here. Also, in the same token, if the application is stopped and a user has left the application completely, left that activity, on stop may get called, but when that user goes and relaunches your application, on restart is likely to be called, which will restart your application, but not recreate your application because it's still in memory. Android hasn't actually killed it. So in that case, we're going to go back through that cycle, and on resume is also going to get called, and your activity is going to be running again. Now, if the application was actually killed, then the next time it gets launched, it's going to start at the onCreate. So we have these basic three spots where your application can essentially be launched. One is from either it's been killed or it's never been launched before, and it'll go through onCreate. The second is where it's actually been stopped and then restarted, and it'll start at onStart and go down. And then the third one is where it's just been paused and resumed. So it's really important to keep all of these scenarios in mind when you're building your Android application. Another thing to keep in mind here is that your application is going to be actually destroyed if the screen orientation changes. So when we look at this diagram of the activity lifecycle, onDestroy is going to be called and your application is going to have to be completely restarted if the user changes the screen orientation or some other major configuration change happens in Android. So just to be aware of that, these are going to be more of a concern when we talk about saving the state of your application later so that you can be prepared to handle all of these things that happen in your lifecycle.